Okay, so let's talk about color in sketches like this. Building off the last tutorial that I made where you have this sketch here consisting of a number of balls that bounce around on the canvas, you can click to add one, like so, and you can click this button down here to remove one. And what I want to do today is show you how to make a second button, another HTML button down here at the bottom that would change the color of all of these. And maybe what we'll just do today is we'll flip between two different colors. So when you click the button, they turn red, and when you click it again, they turn blue, and again, red, blue, so on and so forth. So we'll make a switch that goes back and forth. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is, I'm going to show you a couple different ways to do this, but the first way actually is going to look a little bit new for some of you, and I want to talk about hexadecimal color. So in order to understand that, right now let's go back and just review how it is that you set the color of anything. So if I were drawing, here's the section of code where I draw the balls on the canvas, right? And if you don't have this code, you can go back and watch a previous video where I build it, okay? Or I can also provide this to you if you request, if you email. So if I were to, say I decided I wanted to make all the balls red. Right now they're white, but if I wanted to make them red, then in this draw loop here, one way to do that is before I draw, which is this line of code here, I could simply set a fill, right? And so normally, let's say we wanted them to be red. So you would code that in processing syntax by saying 255, 0, 0, like that. Right, and you'll see that in fact now when I go back to my sketch and refresh the page, yeah, they're red. Okay, great. But you know, the thing with that is to code a color here, we actually have three different colors. And remember, there's also a fourth possibility, which is the opacity of the alpha channel, which is how transparent or opaque you want the color to be. So there are essentially three numbers, not one number, but three numbers that are associated with the color of an object, or of a drawing on the canvas, I should say. So what we could do is we could make three separate variables. We could do something like var r, which would be the red channel, right? And we could set that in this case to 255, like so. And then we could say var G for the green channel. In that case, this is 0, right? And then we could say var B for blue, and that would be 0, like so. And so we'd have those three variables that we could use, and then we could simply set inside here in the fill, we could just say R and G and B, right? So that would be one way that we could do it. But, you know, now we're having to keep track of three separate variables. Let's just make sure that it works. They're still red, okay? And so I don't love that idea, just simply because there's now three lines of code that I have to worry about, and I'd like to have less. Okay? So let's talk about how to pare this down. So one possibility, let's get rid of that. One possibility is we could use an array to hold the color triplet. So var, let's call it, I don't know, we could just call it CLS is an array. And inside there we could put in the 255, the 0, right? And then down here, having packaged all those together, right? One line of code, now they're packaged as a group. So now I can come down here, and here I could say fill. And I could say CLS. Would I make it CLS? CLS. Right. CLS 0 for the first element of the array, CLS 1, and then CLS 2. Like that. And you'll notice that sometimes some of the stuff is not locked. Refresh. It does the same thing. They're still red. Okay. So that works as well. And that's also okay. All right. So all I'm doing here is I'm managing to package all three of those colors together into one nice data structure. That's what this array is. So I don't have to worry about those separate lines of code. Okay. Is it better? I don't know. It's up to you. These are all different ways of doing it. Now, processing also has another way of encoding color that you may or may not be familiar with, and that is using hexadecimal notation. Now, I don't want to get into the details of what that means, but essentially it's just hexadecimal refers to the number 16. Hexadecimal 16. And in base 16 numbers, there are more than 10 different symbols that can be used. So again, without getting totally into the math behind this, in regular base 10 notation for numbers, you can use a 0 to encode a number. You can use a 1. You can use a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, all the way up to a 9. And after that, there are no more symbols. So if you want a number bigger than 9, you have to introduce another decimal place, and then you go 1 and you go back to 0. Again and again, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1, 6, 1, 7, 1, 8, 1, 9. And now there's nothing I can do at this point except to roll over the first digit to a 2, reset the second digit to a 0. So what I can do is, in base 10, which is from all of us, the number system that we grew up with and learned in elementary school, we have 10 different symbols that we can use to represent a quantity, a number. In hexadecimal notation, it's base 16. So there are, yep, you guessed it, 16 possible digits, symbols that we can use to represent a particular number. So there's 0. That's a quantity of nothing. Then there's a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And because we're base 16, actually, I can keep going. So there's another symbol for 10 of something that isn't, this, what you're used to seeing. What do we use for the symbol? We use an A, capital A, all right? And you guessed it, for 11, it's B, and C, and D, and E, and F, all the way up to 15. That's the number 15 in hexadecimal notation. So, if I were to show you this particular number, FF,
it's just
we use that to represent color in base 16, and again, without getting into the concept of powers of 16 and how the different the different hexadecimal places work, what's important to realize is that these two digits right here represent the red, the amount of red that you have. If I'm using this for color, that is, these two represent the amount of green you have, and these two represent the amount of blue you have. And full-on FF, like this, is actually the number 255. And again, 255 here, and again, 255 here. So this is actually equivalent to, in terms of a color property in something like processing. This is actually giving me white, because it's all the red, all the green, and all the blue. All right, this would be equivalent to if I did something like, if I'm setting my fill and I went 255, comma 255, comma 255, I could accomplish the exact same thing by saying fill, and then prefacing it with a hashtag to let the system know that I'm intending to do this as a hexadecimal number. And in that case, I'd write FF. There's my red, FF. There's my green, FF. There's my blue. Okay? Now, if I wanted something different, say I wanted just red, I would go 0, 0, 0, 0. So that's all red, no green, no blue. If I put the green back, that's going to be red and green. That's going to give me yellow. Okay? And processing will understand this as being the same thing as this. Okay? So it's another way of coding color. And again, I've skipped over the nature of the meaning of hexadecimal digits. There's a lot of cool math there, and that's probably good for another lesson. But anyway, so what that means for us, right, is I can kind of encode color a little bit more simply by taking and writing a number in that format. Now, normally in JavaScript, when you want to write hexadecimal numbers, for those of you that might know some JavaScript already, you would preface it with 0x and then FF, right, if you wanted that number. That's not going to work for the processing system in this case. So what you have to do is you actually have to make this thing a string. Sorry, equals. And you put in quotes like so, and then make this hashtag symbol like that. And that will now work for a fill command. You can use that later on, right? So how about if I give it a name? So there you go. All right, var color equals, that's white. Right? Let's make it something new. Let's make it yellow. Okay, so we'll go 0, 0 like that. All right, so now down in my drawing command, or my drawing function, let's put in fill, and I think COL was the variable that I used this time, like that. Okay, and now it's using that right there to understand color. Here we go. Oh, they're there. See, they're yellow. Okay, so that's kind of a nice way of encoding color where you don't have to keep track of the three numbers because they're sort of packaged together for you already. You got your red, you got your green, you got your blue. All right, and so I'm going to suggest that maybe that's one route that we take if we want to start working with colors. Another reason that that's nice is because a lot of times if you find a color picker online, there are many of these things, right? You can kind of scroll around, find the color you want, and you can see you get right down here let me zoom in a little bit. There it is. You can see you get the hexadecimal number, right? That, like as I just showed you. They're not capital letters, but it works the same. Right, so this is nice. You can just kind of pull that number right out. Okay, so those of you who've been maybe using this concept before with color pickers and wondering what this is all about, if you want more information, go read about hexadecimal numbers. It's really interesting. Also, you get the RGB down here as well, CMYK, and hue, saturation, brightness. These are other ways of encoding color down here as well. They all basically give you the same thing. They give you this thing up here, whatever that color is, this thing. Right? Okay, but I'm going to stress that this might be a little easier to use at this point in time. So let's try that. Okay. Now, that's great. But what if I want to make a button that changes all the colors of all the balls? So here's what I'll do. I'm going to make two different variables. We're going to say color 1 and var color 2 equals, and let's make this something else. Let's make it, let's see, I could kind of start, guessing colors, or I could just come back to my fancy web color picker, and let's say, I don't know, maybe let's get like an orange or something like that. Let's see. Let's go over here. How about that? So we'll steal that hex right there, copy it, come back here, and put it in there, like so. Okay. Just to make sure it still works, I can change this to color 2. Can refresh. Oops, wrong page there. Right. Refresh. Click to add a ball, and there's my sort of like I don't know. It's kind of an ugly color. It's like an amber orange or something like that. Okay, now I want to make a button, an HTML button down here that flip-flops between the two colors for the different balls. All right. So I'll come back to my HTML. Let's copy this button code here. Let's put it here. Let's call this, instead of delete button, we'll call it color button, like so. Buttons are inline elements in HTML, which means they appear side by side by nature, by default, across the page, not block level going down the page. We could change that if you wanted to, but for now, I think it's fine. So it says remove all, and clearly we don't want that. So let's say flip color will be our note on the button. And back in my color button, it's called. So back in my JavaScript, first thing I'm going to do is up at the top of the page, I'm going to say color button equals document.query selector, and we'll do, let's see, hashtag color button. Very different use of the hashtag here, isn't it? Yeah, where I'm using it in the context of the query selector function. Here it refers to an element with an ID color button. All right, so yeah, and then down here, it's very different. Here I'm using it to encode essentially a string in the processing environment and tell it that this is to be understood as a hexadecimal number. So please don't confuse the usage of the totally different usages of this thing. Right? It's confusing. All right. So I've got my color button right here, and I'm going to come down to my. Let's go right here. Here it is. Right. So here I'm adding my event listeners for my different buttons. So I'm going to say color button dot add event listener, like so. We're going to listen for a click, like that, and then we're just going to fire off a function right here, and we'll put the handler, the callback function, right inside, right here. And all we're going to do is we're going to say, let's see, if you know what, let's make another. I got an idea. Let's make another variable here called var, and we will call this my fill. How about that? And so let's just sort of initialize this to color 1, so the balls are yellow by default, right? Var my fill. And then down here, I'm gonna, so is that how we want to do it? Let's see. We could actually use a Boolean for that too, just to, let's be interesting. Let's say var col equals 1, or 0. All right, so we'll just kind of flip back and forth. So if the color is 0, maybe we don't want to do that here. Let's see. If we change, I'm trying to think of the most streamlined and understandable way to do this. Yeah, I think probably, because you don't want to be messing around with anything down here. You just want to, yeah. All right, so let's make that be fill is col. So this is the draw function. Okay, so the fill will be whatever color it is. And then let's just initialize this to color 1 like that, like so. All right, so when the program runs, the default is to make all the balls color 1, which is yellow, because this variable, which is going to be the one that I flip back and forth, is going to be holding this value right here, which is yellow, right? And this variable, col, is the one that I'm using to set my fill down here. So then inside here, I think you probably know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take a look at the value of that, right? I'm going to say if col, right? Now I got to do a comparison of some kind. So I could actually compare, let's see how the easiest way to compare strings in JavaScript. JavaScript string comparisons can get tricky. I could try just equals, but sometimes I run into trouble with that. If color equals color 1, let's try that and see what happens. Yep. Color 1, then col equals col2, and then else I'll say col equals col1. Okay, so if the color variable is currently set to color 1, switch it to color 2. Otherwise, then switch it to color 1. And let's see how this works. So come back here. There's an, oh, there it is. Okay, they're yellow. They're yellow. They're yellow. Let's try to flip the color. There it is. They flipped. Let's flip back and forth. So you can see that button is having just the effect that I want. Let me refresh it again. There we go. Flip the color, flip the color, flip the color, flip the color. And it just keeps snapping back and forth between the two. Great. All right. Now, that's okay, right? But actually, if I were going to do this, now that I'm thinking more about it, I think what I would probably do, right, is I would take this out of here. Okay, watch this, right? And I would say, I would probably assign it here. Because we don't need that line of code. And then I would take this out of here, and I would assign it here to make my two colors right there. Again, we don't need that line of code either. And then I might do a different kind of a comparison. Instead of having these variables here, I might keep them. I might say var col1. I might set that equal to, well, let's see, if col var, let's do color. I might not want that. Var cl, and let's set that equal to a 0. Right? So we use a Boolean to flip back and forth. There are just so many different ways that you can do this, right? And then I would say in here, I would do my comparison using Booleans. So I'd say if cl equals 0, then let's make the color that. And at the same time, I could, let's see, I could flip. I don't think this is going to get any easier for you now that I'm thinking about it. So I could say cl equals 1, right? And then else, and I would put this in. So now I have multiple lines in each one of my conditions, and then I would put my cl back to 0 right here. Right? I'm just trying to think of a way to do this that has a better comparison rather than comparing strings. So now I'm just looking at this value right here, which defaults to 0 when I run the program, but then it flips to 1 if I detect it as 0 when I click the button, and it changes the color every time. So let's see. Refresh. Okay, and it's mad at me. It's syntax error 18, unexpected token, else. I forgot to close my, there you go, my if condition. All right. Nope. Color 1 is not defined at line 7. Yeah, I don't need that anymore, right? Of course. Right, so that's gone. So I just have this one variable that's going to flip between 0 and 1 in here, and then depending upon what I find it as, I'll set the color accordingly. Okay. Nope. COL is not defined at line 46. Right. Yes, I still need var COL. Here we go. There it is, right? That, because that is getting set here, right? Okay. No. Object argument is not a valid color representation. What the heck? Var COL. COL is, and that's coming from line P5.js object. Argument. I wonder why it's throwing that. Let's see. It can't be any of these lines. It's got to be down here. Var COL. Yeah. Hang on just a second. Let's pause this. Let me come back and figure this out. See what's going on. Okay, so it turns out this is just a simple problem. What it is this here, right? This value here is not defined or initialized. So actually, it's null right now, and I'm passing that in here before I click a button, and that's what's causing this to happen. So if I just sort of start off, so let's initialize this to this color here, like that. And then when I come back, we're good. And put a ball, and then flip the color, flip back in it, and it works just fine. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to do with this is as follows. I could also, if I wanted to, get rid of this here completely, right? Get rid of this here completely, get rid of this here completely, like so. And all I'm doing is just flipping the value of this particular Boolean variable when I click the color button, right, from between 0 and 1. And then what I could do is I could, and this probably is really the way I should be doing it, finally, I could make my decisions down here, right, inside draw. I'm making a decision about how to draw the balls, what color to make them. That might be something that's best done in the draw function. So here I could put another if statement. I could say if, and now we could look at the status of this CL variable here. So we say if CL equals 0. Right now I can do whatever I want. I can just say, oh, Phil, let's make it, I don't know, let's do, I'll go back to just using plain old, a triplet of 0 to 255 decimal numbers. So let's say 0, 255, 0. Right, so we'll do that if we find that this variable is 0. Else, which means it'll be, what, 1? Then I'm going to say CL, oh, I don't need that. I could just say else fill, and this time let's make it, I don't know, let's do 0, 0, 255. So the thing will switch between green and blue. And this is arguably the fastest, or not the fastest, but the nicest and cleanest way to do it. So I've put one variable up here, which can be a 0 or a 1, right? And then I've got the check to determine when you click the color button what it is. And if it's a 0, I turn it to a 1. If it's a 1, I turn it back to a 0. And you know, you could have more colors if you wanted. You could have this thing go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you could have else ifs in here instead of just else, right? And you could keep swapping between that. You could make it random. Every time you click this button, you could do something different with color. But then down here, all I do is I just simply take a look at the value of that variable. And depending upon what I find, I set the fill accordingly. Okay, so this is indeed the way you'd want to do it after I just took you on that exploration of different things. That could be done. So let's refresh it. Okay, there it's green. It's green. Blue. Green, blue, green, blue, green, blue. Right. Right? That is definitely, were I writing this, that is definitely the way that I would go about it. All right, now the last thing that's kind of related to this is, what if I wanted each ball to have a different color? And it's sort of a different issue, right, isn't it? So I'll just quickly go through how that might work. So having shown this, I'm just going to comment this code out like that. And I don't actually need any of this stuff anymore. Okay, so let's get rid of that. I don't even need to reference this. It doesn't hurt to leave it, but I'm going to get rid of it. And we'll go like so and get rid of that as well. So right now I'm just back to sort of the base app that I had, which just has the white balls moving around and the button does nothing, but I can add and remove balls at will like that. So what I want to show you now is, how does each ball have its own color? If I wanted, each ball to have a different color, and for now I'm going to let them be just random when I make them. So to do that, what I'd want to do is actually add a property to the ball class itself. I'd want to add a color property to the ball class. So coming down here to where I define the ball class here, currently the properties inside of it, every ball has an X position, a Y position, as defined here. So the X position, the Y position, the vertical or the horizontal velocity, the vertical velocity, and those were randomized. So now let's give it a color. Now, in this context, it might be easiest to just go back to using the R, the G, and the B, rather than trying to sort of grab a random number that's hexadecimal, and there'd be a little bit of work to make that. So I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to do it this way. So I'm going to say this dot R, right, is, or maybe this dot red, because we might use R for radius, right, if these things are really balls on the screen. So we might want to reserve that. So this dot red equals, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this code right here, which gives me a random integer, and I'm going to say, okay, math.floor, and I'm going to go up to 256. But I think that 256, so if it draws a one, yeah, that should give me, yeah. Okay, anything up to 255 technically then. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for each of the other colored channels. So we'll make this one green, and then we'll make this blue. And let me just stress and say this again, that all I'm doing here is just defining properties of ball objects. So I can call these whatever I want to, right? The fact that I've chosen to call them red, green, and blue is just for our own sake of understanding. When we look at these things, it'll be more clear to us what we're dealing with, okay? But this is not something that the system understands yet what it is. So I've got red, green, and blue as my my three properties of my class, within my class, my ball class. All right, so now, sorry about that, back to here. So now what I'm going to do is use those properties, which are assigned randomly when a ball is instantiated, to choose to make the color of the ball. In other words, to paint the ball that color when it's drawn on the canvas. Right. Each ball owns an amount of red, an amount of green, and an amount of blue. I don't know what they are because they are random. But then in the drawing function right here, I'm going to say fill, and actually I'm not going to do it there. I'm going to do it inside my for loop, because this is where I'm iterating through the array of balls, and I'm deciding to draw each one according to its current position and its current its X position, its Y position. And so while I'm at it, let's just set the fill according to each ball's current R, G, and B. So what I'd want to say, you know how to do this, I'd say balls I, it gives me the ith ball, and I would say dot, and what were those variables again? It's red, green, and blue, right? So dot red, and then comma, balls I dot green, and then comma, balls I dot blue, like so. And that will individually get the red, the green, and the blue channels for each ball one at a time, set the fill of that color, draw that ball, because we're working for the ith, we're working on the ith ball, and then move that ball, bounce that ball, and then go to the next ball in the array. Right? So very important to understand sort of how this loop works with this counter variable I. I starts at 0, right? And then it does everything for the first ball in the array. it sets the color, it draws the ellipse, it moves it, it bounces it. Then I is 1, and then it does it for the second ball in the array. Right? Same thing all the way through, and then all the way until we get to the last one. And if that's the case, it should properly assign a color to each one of these. Refresh. Okay, that one came out sort of a pale green. That one's more of a purplish brown. Right, now they will all be completely random every time I click. All right, now you might imagine that something else that I can do at this point is institute my flip color button, so when I click it, something happens to those colors. Right, so there's, and I'll end with that, right, just because this video is getting long and I think we've had enough. So I'll come back to here and let's put all of that stuff back in, some of that stuff actually. So let's put the color button back, right, let's get a reference to it right there. Let's put my function back, but I'm going to redo what happens inside here, all right? And here's what I'm going to do. So inside of my event listener, or inside of my callback function for my event listener for the color button, I'm going to loop through the array of balls, and I'm going to reset all of their colors. I'm going to give them all new random colors every time I click that button. And the way I'm going to do that is, first I'm just going to copy a loop so I don't have to write it from scratch again. So I just came down here and I'm just copying this loop, which loops through the, let's do this one actually. Let's take this one. All right, it loops through the array of balls. And I'm going to paste that right here. I'm going to get rid of a whole lot of code. I don't need any of this stuff, right? And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to access, we don't need that either. So I'm going to access the red, the green, and the blue properties of each ball, and I'm going to reset those to some new random numbers. Right, so here's my for loop. This is good. I'm iterating through the array of all the balls, however many there are. And let's go steal that code right here that randomizes and sets the colors for red, green, and blue. All right, let's paste that right into here. That really saves some time, didn't it? And now I can't use keyword this anymore because I'm not inside the definition of the class. But what I can say is I am in this for loop, right, where I have an array of balls, and I'm looking at the ith one. So I can change this to balls I dot red, and then I can change this to balls I dot green, and then I can change this to balls I dot blue, and that will reset these properties, red, green, and blue for each ball to new values. All right, let's try it. So refresh. Here we go. Okay, that one's green. I don't know what color that is. That one's brown. That one's brown. That one's purple. All right, watch now. Hit flip color. Watch the colors change. Oh, there you go. They all changed. All right, let's do it again. So each time I click, I get new random colors assigned for each one.
It's really cute. Okay.
All right, and let's put some more on the screen just to see what it looks like.
That's awesome. Okay.
Let's put a whole bunch.
So you have, and every student has something called PDF.
There we go.
PDF text.
And flip color, ready, go.
Inside of more tools.
Yeah, you almost can't. If you follow one ball individually, you can see it changing when I click the button. But otherwise, just sort of looking at the whole group of them, you can't really tell much is happening, right, when I click that button. But try following one or two of them, and you'll see them changing. All right, then we can start removing some. There we go.
Somebody just texted me.
All right, we can get all the way back down to a few, and now you can start to see the difference. There's some kind of, maybe there's some kind of game in there to see, who can recognize when the button was pressed or when the colors changed, depending on how many balls are on the screen. Right? It's easy to see now that things are changing, but when I had a whole lot of them, it was really hard to tell when that button was being clicked. I mean, obviously you can see me click the button, right? But if you couldn't see that, if this was just some scenario where you had a game with lots of colored balls bouncing around and just at different times they flipped colors, and you had to, it was like a reaction time thing, and you had to click a button to decide, oh, they just changed colors, I saw it. Well, how would that behave depending upon how many things you were looking at? That would be a really interesting thing to do. and perhaps just kind of accumulate some data for how good people are at recognizing a sudden change in color of lots of things versus one or two things,
Open the Chrome Web Store,
right? I don't know,
and then
just a
when
thought.
you're
Okay,
here,
so
you're gonna type
hopefully that's helpful. This gives you a whole bunch of ideas to play with. That's it. I'm out. Take care.
PDF